The largest cruise ship in the world is 1,200 feet long and carries 9,000 people. That is more than most American towns. When something goes wrong on a cruise ship, you are not on vacation anymore. You are in a floating city that is about to need saving.
Most cruise passengers never hear about these disasters. The cruise industry markets safety, but 5 times in the last 40 years, cruise ships have sunk, rolled, or caught fire, with consequences the brochures never mention. This is what happens when a floating city fails.
January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia, 951 feet, 114,000 tons, 4,229 people on board, 319 crew. The flagship of the Italian Costa Cruises line. Captain Francesco Schettino decided to perform a, quote, salute, end quote, to the island of Giglio. A sail passed close to the shore to impress his former matra. He was 300 feet off course, in waters he had not charted, at 20 knots, at night. At 9:45 p.m., the Concordia struck an underwater rock. A 160-foot gash opened in her hull. 5 compartments flooded. The ship began to list. Captain Schettino ordered the crew to announce it was, quote, just an electrical problem.
For over an hour, passengers were told to return to their cabins. The ship was sinking. The evacuation order did not come until 10:54 p.m. By then, the Concordia was listing 30 degrees. Lifeboats on the low side could not be launched. Those on the high side were too far above the water.
32 people died. Most drowned in passageways below deck because the ship was tilted sideways and no one had trained them to navigate a vessel laid on its side. Captain Schettino abandoned the ship while his passengers were still trapped. He got into a lifeboat at 11:30 p.m.
The Costa Concordia rolled onto her starboard side at 6 a.m. She sat on a reef 200 feet from the Giglio harbor, visible from the beach, for 2.5 years before she was righted and towed away. Captain Schettino received 16 years in prison.
September 28, 1994. The MS Estonia, a ferry cruise ship, 620 feet, 889 passengers and crew, crossing from Tallinn, Estonia, to Stockholm, Sweden, overnight through the Baltic Sea.
In heavy seas at 1:15 a.m., the bow visor on the Estonia separated from the hull and pulled the watertight car deck ramp open. Seawater flooded the car deck at 1,800 tons per minute. The ship capsized in 27 minutes. 852 people died. 757 were inside the ship when it went down. The ones who survived had been on the upper open decks, smoking cigarettes, drinking late. They jumped into 35-degree water, and most died from hypothermia within 90 minutes.
The MS Estonia remains at a depth of 290 feet. The Swedish and Finnish governments declared her a gravesite and passed laws forbidding anyone from diving on the wreck. For decades, conspiracy theories have persisted. Was there military cargo on board? Why was the investigation sealed?
April 16, 2014. The MV Sewol, a South Korean ferry cruise ship. 476 passengers, 325 of them high school students on a school trip, sailing from Incheon to Jeju Island.
The Sewol had been illegally modified, extra cabin space added on top. Cargo capacity doubled beyond her safety rating. She was top-heavy and overloaded the morning of April 16th. When the third mate turned her at a sharp angle, she listed hard, and kept listing. The students were told by the captain's crew to stay in their cabins and not move. They obeyed. The ship continued to list. At 8:48 a.m., the captain abandoned the ship. He changed into civilian clothes first so the students would not see him leave. The students were still waiting in their cabins for instructions.
304 people died. 250 of them were students. The captain was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The disaster triggered a political earthquake in South Korea that contributed to the impeachment of the president 3 years later. March 23, 2019. The Viking Sky, A new luxury expedition cruise ship, 47,000 tons, 1,373 passengers and crew, caught in a Norwegian winter storm off the coast of Mura.
All 4 engines failed simultaneously. The ship lost power. She drifted toward the rocky Norwegian coast at 90 degrees to the waves. The captain issued a mayday. Helicopters evacuated passengers one at a time in 50-mile-an-hour winds over 13 hours. Everyone survived. 479 passengers were lifted by helicopter before engineers got one of the 4 engines restarted and the ship limped into port. The investigation found the cause was low lubrication oil in the diesel generator sump tanks, a mistake by a tank gauge installer.
The Viking Sky was lucky. Helicopters reached her in time. The cruise industry has pointed to a rescue as a success. But look at it another way. 1,300 people were 15 minutes of drift from the rocks of one of the most brutal coastlines in Europe, 1 engine away from a second Estonia.
Then there is the Achille Lauro, an Italian cruise ship, famous for being hijacked by Palestinian terrorists in 1985. They murdered a disabled Jewish passenger named Leon Klinghoffer and threw his body overboard in his wheelchair.
What most people do not know is that the Achille Lauro also caught fire and sank in 1994 off the coast of Somalia. She was carrying 979 passengers. 3 died. The rest were rescued. The ship burned for 3 days before she went down in 4,500 feet of water.
5 ships, 3,188 dead. Each one broke a rule that had been written after the previous disaster. Concordia broke Titanic's navigation rules. Estonia broke the ferry door rules. Sewol broke the stability rules. Viking Sky almost broke the engine redundancy rules. And right now, tonight, there are over 300 cruise ships at sea, each one a floating city, each one built to pass inspection, each one a decision away from the next disaster. The people running them are tired, overworked, outsourced. The brochures do not mention that either.
The ocean does not care that you paid $4,000 for a veranda. It does not care that the buffet is open 24 hours. It will sink a cruise ship with the same indifference it sank a tanker. Remember the ships. Subscribe to Salt Files.